Chapter 4. On the second day of training my employer gave to me. The next day I found myself sitting in that same strip mall, sitting in that same insurance agency, sitting in that same lobby, sitting on that same pleather couch. Predictably, I showed up 15 minutes early. I figured it would give me some time to ponder Robert's question. I wasn't the kind of guy that placed a significant amount of value on self-reflection. Honestly, I kind of despised it, thinking for the sake of thinking. I never really thought about it too much, but maybe it had something to do with the fact that I had an incredibly short attention span. The receptionist walked into the lobby. She looked at me with a puzzled expression on her face. She trotted over to her desk, put down her purse, and asked, "What happened? Did you get fired already?" I don't think so. I hope not." I was a bit taken aback by her question. What kind of greeting was that? "Sorry, I didn't mean to be so blunt. I'm just curious why you're waiting in the lobby, that's all." She spoke with a hint of a southern drawl. I didn't pick up on it before, but she was clearly not from California. "I'm just early, early to rise, early to work, etc., etc. Is it that taboo?" No, of course not. That still doesn't explain why you're waiting in the lobby." I could tell she wasn't trying to be rude, but then it hit me. Why am I waiting in the lobby? You do know that the door to the sales floor opened about an hour ago, right? "Ah, yeah, I really appreciate it," I said as I got up out of my chair and slowly began walking towards the door. As I opened the door and began to walk through, I realized something. I didn't even bother to catch her name. That wasn't very characteristic of me, to forego an introduction. "By the way, I'm Mike Allen. It's nice to meet you. What's your name?" "Tracy Jones. It's nice to meet you as well, Mike Allen." Tracy had probably seen hundreds, if not thousands of people like me walk through that door over the years. "Have fun with the trainee program." She waved me off, and I walked back to my desk. I still hadn't really branched out to meet the other salespeople yet. I figured that over time I would meet most of them and hopefully even pick up a few friends along the way. After trudging around for a few minutes, I found my way over to my desk. Most of the salespeople had messy and unkempt workspaces. It was like a landfill of paperwork and sticky notes. How did they get anything done around here? I sat down and organized the few things I had on my desk. It wasn't much, but it was mine to work with. "What's up?" I looked up, and Robert was standing over me with a confused look on his face. "Well, I'm organizing my space." I didn't realize how absurd that might have looked to someone else. I mean, yeah, what's the point? "Mike, you have a whopping 3 things on your desk. What possible difference does it make moving your notepad from one side of the desk to the other?" I stared at him for a second and realized just how right he was. "It's like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic." "Fair enough. Good morning, by the way." No better way to start my day than making a complete fool of myself. Granted, Robert had a flair for theatrics and making a small spectacle out of every little thing. It was one of his more charming qualities. "Yeah, good morning to you, too," he said as he shook his head and laughed. Robert strolled on over to his desk and put his stuff down. Robert opened the desk drawer of one of his filing cabinets and started rummaging around for something. Where did I leave it? I couldn't help but stare. It's not like I had anything else to do. What was he looking for? What was so important? "Aha! There it is, right where I left it," Robert said as he tugged on the end of an extension cord. He pulled out what looked to be some kind of headset. "What's that?" This is a phone splitter. It's basically just a headset. I can listen to your calls in real time and coach you as you begin to screw them up." "Robert, as always, your vote of confidence is greatly appreciated." "I'm not here to puff your ego, kid. I'm here to teach you how to make money," he said as he plugged in his headset. Robert grabbed a few sheets of paper, presumably the no-sale list he was talking about yesterday. He gently placed the list down in front of me on my desk and pointed. "This is a pot of gold. Those are high-intent leads that the company has purchased for you. Well, maybe not for you specifically, so you don't have to purchase leads on your own. So, who are these people? I was waiting for him to step in and say, "But wait, there's more." They're people who at one point wanted to buy insurance and made the unfortunate mistake of clicking on an online advertisement. At some point in time, they gave us their personal information. Ah. Part of me was fairly skeptical. I mean, if these leads were so good, then why in the world was he giving them to me? I'm 2 days on the job. I pulled the list away from Robert. I intently studied the list like a superstitious old woman combing through the daily horoscope. At first glance, it didn't look like anything special. As I began looking over the list, Robert said, "Don't overthink it. Just call them." What should I say? Don't overthink it. He repeated his ultimatum in a firmer tone of voice, like a decree made from behind a podium. So you want me to just call them up and say the same thing as yesterday? Or... Mike, get out of your own way. Pick up the phone, pick a name on the list, give them a call, and read the script. So I did just that. I picked the first name off the list, Jeff Palooza. I picked up the phone, dialed the number, and went back to work. Ring, ring, ring. Hello, the caller on the other line said. Hi, is Jeff Palooza there? Yeah, speaking. Hi, Jeff, this is Mike Allen. I'm an insurance agent with Montrose & Partners. How are you today? I was doing fine before you called. What'd you want? Robert snickered in the background. I made an intentional effort to not let it perturb me. Well, the reason for the call today is that I'm following up on some information you submitted about getting a life insurance policy. I looked over at Robert, and he was perusing through a copy of Soldier of Fortune magazine, the kind of magazine that you pick up at a mini-mart rack. He looked up long enough to make eye contact and gave me a quick thumbs up. The thing is, Mark, I was looking and realized that it was really just too expensive. It's actually a lot cheaper than you might think. Robert started laughing, a bit louder than last time. Apparently, he found my performance rather comical. I covered the receiver with my hand so the prospect couldn't pick up on Robert's peanut gallery commentary. I'm sorry, I just can't afford it right now. Which was followed by a loud click, and the phone went dead. I slowly put down the receiver and looked over at Robert. What happened there? He said that he couldn't afford it and hung up. Couldn't afford what? Did you pitch him something? He said he couldn't afford it. I heard what you said the first time. I'm asking you what happened. Do you know what happened? What was I supposed to say? I sat there stewing in my own pity party. Robert couldn't help but insert himself back into the conversation. He preferred the driver's seat, which was fine by me. Here's the thing, Mike. 80% of all people think life insurance is just too expensive. That's a fact, Jack. It's a fact that means absolutely nothing to nobody, Robert explained. Uh-huh. Honestly, I didn't have much to say. It wasn't for lack of trying. I just ran out of things to say. What happened? What happened was that you didn't ask the right questions. Robert's tone began to diverge into a more assertive and aggressive approach. For instance? He realized it was too expensive. Why? How did he come to that conclusion? What did you say about price? I'm not sure. That's exactly my point. You know his destination, but you don't know his journey. Do you even know why he was shopping in the first place? Why did he need life insurance and then all of a sudden not need it? How does he know it's too expensive? Yeah, that makes sense. People often say one thing but have underlying concerns. Maybe the price was too high because the quote was too high. Maybe he went through a medical exam and found out he was seriously ill and couldn't qualify for a good rate. Maybe the agent was trying to pitch a pricey policy. You can't understand the destination without understanding the journey. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Let's try it again. Who's next on your list? I scanned my finger across the list until I found the next name. The name read Jared Poindexter. So, what are you waiting for? We're burning daylight here, kid. Robert picked up the receiver and handed it back to me. I grabbed the receiver from him and started calling away. Ring, 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 ring. Hello? Hi, is Jared home? This is him. Who's this? My name is Mike Allen with Montrosian Insurance Partners. Is this a bad time to talk? I was met with a long-winded pause and a heavy sigh on the other end of the phone. Are you calling about life insurance? Yes, I am. I'm following up on your recent request for an insurance quote. Ha! My recent request? If you call 6 months ago recent, then yes, it was recent. I paused and Robert pushed a note across my desk. I read the note and I looked back at him like he was crazy. Robert made a nudging motion with his hand. 6 months is quite some time to be looking for life insurance. Have you given up on getting the right policy in place? Given up? No, I'm still looking, just not looking that urgently. I'd never gotten this far before. I really had no idea what to do. I looked over at Robert for some guidance. Robert was entranced in his magazine. What's holding you back from getting a policy? Robert peered up from his magazine. Apparently he was impressed. I guess he figured I was doing a pretty good job. There was another pause on the other end of the phone. Look, here's the thing. I'm young and healthy. I'm pretty much a stud. I really don't feel the need to buy life insurance, he said with a jocular tone of voice. It's cheaper than you might think, especially for someone young and healthy. That makes sense, but I still don't think I need it. I had a serious case of mental blockage. I looked up and over at Robert for some kind of lifeline. Robert whispered, Come on, you got a couple of minutes, right? Jared, just a couple of minutes of your time. What do you say? I've really got to go, but call me in a few days and we can talk. Click. The phone went silent. Not too bad, Mikey. I mean, it wasn't good, but not bad at all. Robert smiled and put his fist out for me to bump. We bumped fists for a brief moment of celebration. Thanks. Yeah, that wasn't too bad. The quality of your questions has gotten infinitely better since yesterday. It's almost like you're reading a script. I chuckled a bit. Robert was right. I needed to trust the process and stop trying to fight it. Mike, ever hear of the framing effect? Nope, I can't say that I have. It's a rather simple principle of psychology. The framing effect basically states that people are biased. As biased people, our choices can be manipulated by merely the way in which information is presented to us. For instance? For instance, this airbag has a 95% success rate that can be reworded to say this airbag only fails 5% of the time. You see? Uh-huh. Can you give me another example? Like one for me to use during a call? I know I was asking a lot for the trainer to actually train me, but what could I say? I had high expectations for people and was eager to learn. I sure can. You said something to the effect of life insurance is a lot cheaper when you buy young, or some nonsense like that. Why not try it this way? Robert paused for a second and cleared his throat. He was readjusting himself in his chair. Mike, do you know the best part about buying life insurance when you're young? It's cheap. Okay, I'll give it a try. What else did you notice? Besides you floundering around like a fish out of water? Yeah, aside from me floundering around like a fish out of water. You ever hear the phrase that telling isn't selling? Nope. Mike, that was a rhetorical question. How much do you like people bossing you around? Do you like people telling you what to do or how to think? I mean, does anyone enjoy getting bossed around? That's my point. When you just tell people what to do all the time, they hate it and by proxy hate you. When you ask them what they would like to do, it becomes easier to build trust. I hadn't even noticed it, but the noise level had increased sharply as the other brokers filled out the office. The sales floor was humming with excitement. Okay, lesson's over. Let's keep going. We're burning daylight, kid. We got to pick up the pace. You're starting to make me look bad. I cracked my knuckles and picked up the phone. I slid my finger down the list. This time around, I called halfway through the list before a single person picked up the phone. I ran into a string of disconnected phone numbers and answering machines, so I decided to take a breather and let up. I still wasn't accustomed to sitting all day. My lower back was killing me. "You giving up on me or what?" Robert didn't miss a thing. That is to say, when he found time away from reading his magazine. Robert had started reading another magazine to pass the time by. This time he was reading some kind of sports magazine. "I just need a quick break." I rolled my shoulders out and sat back down in my seat. As I sat back down, the chair made a loud thud sound. I looked down the list and started back at it. This was the exact mindless kind of drudgery that I always envisioned people did at an office job. I convinced myself this is what I wanted. I convinced myself this is what I needed. I convinced myself to dial and smile. Ring, ring, ring. Hello. The noise jolted me back into action. I quickly sat upright in my seat. I wasn't expecting someone to pick up right away. After randomly shuffling the papers on my desk and blurted out, "Hello, is Mr. Vega available?" "That's me. How can I help you today?" He responded with a little bit of intrigue, maybe just enough to keep this going a few minutes. "The reason for the call today is that I'm following up on your recent interest in life insurance. Is this a good time to talk?" Robert started snapping his fingers to get my attention. I wasn't following the script, and we both knew it. "Actually, this is a pretty good time to talk, but I'm not really in the market for life insurance. You see, my wife filled out a form online, and she put my information down because she thought I should get life insurance." "Ah, well, Mr. Vega, why do you think she did that?" "Because she wants a huge paycheck when I croak. Why else would she do that?" I blurted out in spontaneous laughter. I took a deep breath to regain my composure. No. Why do you think she put down your information and not her information?" Well, we've been talking about it for a while now, and she wants me to get insured." "Huh, that's interesting. Tell me more." "There's not much to tell. We have kids, and I'm the breadwinner for the family. I get it. I just don't think I want it." "Really? Why don't you want it?" I could hear a deep breath on the other end of the line. I could tell he was starting to think. I could tell this conversation was taking a turn. "Why should I buy life insurance? I'm the one that will be dead." "Mr. Vega, that is a coherent and logical way to think about life insurance." "Yeah? Try telling my wife that." "Let me ask you something, though." "Sure, kid. Go ahead." "What happens to your wife if you die?" "I'd imagine she would just shack up with my no-good best friend and they would live happily ever after." I took a second to think about his response. He wasn't following me, or maybe he was and I didn't like the answer. I looked at Robert in a desperate plea for help, and he whispered to me, "Kids, Mike, kids." I covered the end of my receiver and asked Robert, "Kids?" "His kids, you dummy. Ask about his kids." I asked in a soft whisper, "Mr. Vega, what about your kids?" "What about them?" "What happens to them? Sir, what I'm asking is, how do you want them to remember you? What kind of quality of life do you want them to have?" The phone went silent, dead silent. That was my clue to do just one thing, and that was to shut my mouth. So I did just that. I shut up, and I waited. A few seconds went by. All I could hear was a heavy breathing on the other end of the phone. Not a pleasant experience by any stretch of the imagination. A minute went by, then 2, and then 3. I knew the awkwardness would break one of us. "Like any parent, I want the absolute best for my kids. In this life or the next, I want to make sure they have the best in life." It was all going so great, and then I decided to stick my foot right into my mouth. I saw that as an opportunity, so I pounced on his statement. "Actions speak louder than words. Why don't we—" And at that moment, I realized my intemperance wrote a check my butt couldn't cash. It was at that very moment I had stepped in a heaping pile of excrement. You think so? How about this action? How about I come on down to where you work and we meet in the parking lot? How about I come on down there and I break your legs? Who do you think you are talking to me like that?" His rage-filled diatribe was followed by a loud click. I started sweating bullets and covered my mouth to mask the shocked look stamped across my face. I didn't want to make eye contact with Robert. I turned slowly over to his direction, and his jaw was almost on the floor. His mouth was gaping open in utter disbelief. Some of the other brokers were looking over at me for the first time, and not in a good way. The entire sales floor dropped what they were doing and burst out laughing at my expense. Honestly, I couldn't realize it at the time, but their ridicule was their way of welcoming me to the club. Someone yelled from the peanut gallery, "Come on, kid, stand up and take a bow." Why not? I stood up and took a bow. From across the room, I heard someone start a slow, loud clap. Clap, clap, clap. The room fell silent, but I didn't really know why. I turned around and Bill was standing right behind me. Clearly, based on his facial expression, he was not amused by my performance. "Are you going to make me regret hiring you?" he whispered, just loud enough for everyone on the sales floor to hear. My face turned completely pale. My heart began to race and my palms awkwardly began to sweat. The mood in the room became overwhelmingly reticent. That was the power of Bill. That was the power of being the boss. Bill stared down the room and began to shout out sarcastic orders. "How many other people in this room get paid to stand around? Please, raise your hand. Raise your hand if you get paid to do nothing. If not, then get back to work." I immediately sat down and grabbed my phone. Bill slammed his office door behind him. I took that as my cue to get back to work. Robert and I looked up for a second at each other and smiled. "Who's next on your list?" I looked down at the list, and the next name on the list was Bob Reduca. "His name is Bob." "Well, what are you waiting for? It's time to sell Bob some life insurance." I picked up the phone and started dialing. Ring, ring, ring. "Bob speaking." "Hi, Bob. My name is Mike Allen from Montrosian Insurance Partners. How are you today?" "I'm good. What's up?" Bob seemed to be in a jovial mood and surprisingly happy to talk to me. What an unexpected and frankly pleasant change of pace, I thought. "The reason I'm calling is to see if you ended up getting your life insurance policy squared away." "Life insurance? Turns out that I don't qualify for life insurance." "Bob, can I ask you something? Why were you looking in the first place?" "Doesn't really matter now, does it?" Bob scoffed at me. His mood noticeably dampened as the conversation progressed. I looked over at Robert. I wasn't quite sure what to say, so I took a leap of faith and just blurted out something. What if I told you that I could get you a life insurance policy?" "Mike. It is Mike, right?" His tone shifted from disdain to indignation like the flip of a switch. "Yes, sir. Mike Allen." "You seem like a nice enough kid, but it ain't going to happen. I've got stacks of medical claims to put phone books to shame. It'd be a waste of time." "Bob, what do you have to lose?" That's fair. Go ahead. I'll give you a shot. If you're okay wasting your time, so am I." "Give me 1 second to just jot down some information." I grabbed the end of my receiver and looked over at Robert. "What the heck do I say?" Robert put down his magazine, waved me off, and said, "Just go with it." I couldn't believe this guy. What kind of advice was that? Just go with it? What a putz. But nonetheless, I had to figure something out. "Let's start with the basics, Bob. Why are you looking for life insurance?" "Let's get this straight. I was looking for a burial policy and nothing more." Ah, that makes sense. How much coverage were you looking for?" $11,000, that's all. I'm not looking for $100,000. I'm not looking for some glamorous expensive policy. I want $11,000 of coverage, no more and no less." "Interesting. Why $11,000?" I mean, it was an oddly specific number, and he was adamant on that amount. I felt a certain level of entitlement to at least figure that out. "What do you mean? That's just how much I need." His voice became slightly more agitated. Apparently I had struck a nerve, so I decided to run it back a bit. I kept reminding myself to understand the journey, not just the destination. "Sorry for the confusion. What I'm curious about is how you arrived at 11,000. "I figured that's what I'll need to bury myself." Robert had slid a piece of paper across my desk. I read the note and nodded. The note simply said, "Move on." Just when I thought he had some kind of vested interest in my success, turns out that couldn't be any further from the truth. Robert was making a mockery of this entire excursion. Like any good foot soldier, I carried on with my marching orders and didn't let it faze me. "Got it. $11,000. Who would be the beneficiary?" "That's the problem." Bob abruptly cleared his throat and coughed. It was a splintery type of cough, like hearing static on the radio. "Tell me more." "I'm not married and I don't have kids." "I see. Yeah, I could see how that would be an issue." I looked over at Robert for some guidance. All I got in return was him shrugging his shoulders. Shoulder shrugs. What's that supposed to mean? So I decided to just freestyle the rest of the conversation. "What about a close family member? Do you have any siblings?" "Ha! Oh, I've got a brother. I've got a brother that I can trust about as far as I can throw him." Stuck between a rock and a hard place. I looked over at Robert again, pleading for him to step in. Robert looked up from his magazine and shot me a thumbs up. He licked the tip of his thumb and turned the page of his magazine. "Even if I could qualify, which is doubtful to begin with, I don't know who I could trust to give the money to." "Let's not put the apple cart before the horse. Let's start with the basics. What kind of health issues do you have?" "Where do I begin? Let's see." Bob began droning on about his various medical woes. Robert laughed out loud and slowly flipped through the pages of his magazine. He looked at me and tapped on his watch. I looked down at my watch, and I had spent nearly 30 minutes talking to this guy. As he began telling me his entire medical history, I had started jotting down things on some scratch paper. I wasn't sure why, but I was taking notes. I didn't know what was useful and what wasn't, but regardless, if he spoke it, then I wrote it. "Let's see. I take insulin for my diabetes. I take super concentrated doses of vitamin A for my liver spots. I take..." He continued on for several more minutes of expounding his medical history. I didn't have the nerve to interrupt him, nor the experience to know how. Bob took a breath, and I realized that slight pause was the only chance I had to interject myself back into the driver's seat of the conversation. "Bob, I think I have all the information I need to run you a quote." Robert had covered my microphone with his hand, leaned over to me, and quietly whispered, "Let's wrap this up." Before I could take a half-second to think, Bob was back at it. "Oh yeah, I take medication for my..." As you can imagine, this conversation was going nowhere fast. I didn't know a heck of a lot about insurance, but this guy definitely sounded uninsurable. Robert slid another piece of paper across my desk and whispered something to me. "Read it, say it, repeat it." I looked down at the paper, analyzed it, and took a shot. "Bob, sorry to interrupt you. Let's do this. As your insurance agent, I recommend we submit an application and see what kind of policy we can qualify you for." I put a lot of faith in Robert, maybe even a little too much faith. I just met this guy like 3 days ago, and I'm hanging on his every word. Then again, it's not like I had much of a choice. "It depends. How long would something like that take?" I cleared my throat and then read directly from one of the scripts Robert provided me earlier in the day. "It's a rather short process as far as the actual paperwork is concerned. I just need to collect some basic information from you, things like your social security number, date of birth, address, etc. Then I submit the paperwork to the insurance company. At that point, they send out a nurse to your home or place of work to collect a blood, urine, and saliva sample. They take all that information and figure out if they want to make you an offer for insurance." It was a mouthful, so I wanted to give him a second to digest it all. Bob's silence was noticeable, not even a cough. This was one of those times that I knew to shut up and wait. The question was, wait for how long? Bob made some incoherent noises on the other end of the line. I took that as my cue to jump back in. Does that all make sense, the way I explained it? My question was followed by a long pause, some uncomfortable sighs, and some faint sounds of Bob moving around in his chair. He was mulling it over in his mind, weighing the pros and cons of jumping back down this rabbit hole with me. Okay, let's do it. What do you need from me? We talked for another 20 minutes or so, and Bob provided me with just about all the information I needed, at least enough info to get the ball rolling. Robert was genuinely impressed with me. Some of the other agents had gathered around my desk to listen in. All I had to do was wrap up the conversation and then set up a follow-up appointment with Bob. So, Bob, any other questions before we submit the application? Nope, that should do it. Oh, there is one thing. Who should we list as the beneficiary for the life insurance policy? I looked over to Robert and he whispered to me, Leave it blank. Bob, why don't we leave it blank for now until we hear back from the insurance company? That works for me. How long should all this take? It could take anywhere from 3 to 5 days to set up the medical exam. From there, it could take anywhere from 1 to 5 weeks to get an offer. Wow, I didn't realize it would take that long, he said, almost like someone in one of those cheesy infomercials you see on late-night TV. Robert grabbed my arm and whispered, Don't worry, Bob. I'll hold your hand every step of the way. I nodded back at Robert. Bob, I completely understand how you feel. Don't worry, though. I'll hold your hand every step of the way. I appreciate it, Mike. So is that it? That's it. I'll follow up soon, Bob. Click. The other agents congratulated me with some well-orchestrated golf claps. I could tell right away that this was the place for me. The office wasn't very glamorous, but this is the place where I could make a name for myself. All right. Everybody calm down. Keep your skirts on. Good job, kid. Walk with me. I need a refill. Robert slowly got up from his chair and motioned over to the break room. Sure thing, I shouted eagerly as I stood up out of my chair. We walked over towards the break room. Robert was a step or two ahead of me, and he stopped at the pot of coffee and stared at it for a second. As I approached, he shouted something at the top of his lungs. No, it can't be! Is that decaf coffee in the coffee maker? He grabbed the pot of coffee in his hands and swung back towards the sales floor. Robert started belligerently berating the sales floor. He held the pot of coffee up in the air. Which one of you morons made decaf? Who's responsible for this? The room was silent for a second, and then everyone went back to making their sales calls. Nobody cared. As Robert turned his back to the sales floor, someone yelled, Your mother made it! Robert dumped the pot down the sink drain and started rummaging through cabinet drawers. Robert was determined, a man on a quest. A quest for what? I had no idea. Ha ha, real funny. Laugh it up, jerks. He murmured indiscriminately to himself for a couple of minutes. Robert was unusually irritated, and I couldn't tell why. Who gets that mad over decaf coffee? I thought he would be elated after my call. I guess I was wrong. Robert was a hard man to please and harder to understand. My grandfather would say he was a tough nut to crack. What's up? I asked, with compassion marred by curiosity. He was standing up against the refrigerator with his head down, trolling on his phone. He looked up for a second and said, Decaf. Like I was supposed to know what that meant somehow. Robert didn't think that statement warranted a follow-up question, but I had no clue why he was throwing such a temper tantrum over decaf coffee. Okay, what about decaf? What kind of self-respecting salesperson drinks decaf? It makes our whole industry look bad, like a bunch of schmucks. This isn't some fly-by-night operation. This isn't a used car lot." I wasn't sure where to go with that, so I didn't. We both stood there with an awkward, silent anticipation for the coffee pot to finish brewing. 5 minutes or so passed by. I was fixated on the slow drip of the caffeinated coffee Robert loaded into the machine. Once the pot was finished, it made a loud bing. "Perfecto. That's the good stuff. Fully leaded, baby." He handed me a mug and we both walked back to our desks. We both sat down and got resituated for another exhilarating round of sales calls. I'd finally gotten a base hit, and man, it felt great. I took a big sip of that coffee and stared up at the old ceiling tiles. Maybe I didn't work in the most glamorous place, but why should that matter? I'd been given a chance to make something out of myself, and I didn't intend on squandering that opportunity. I put my mug down and pulled in the lead list. Robert looked at me. He raised up his coffee mug and said, "Let's get on it." "What do we do about that last guy?" I asked with a supreme audacity. Robert smiled at my youthful exuberance, or maybe my naivete. He slowly raised his coffee mug towards his mouth. Before drinking, he said, "What do we do about that last guy? Nothing. He's uninsurable." It felt like someone hit me with a garbage truck, then for good measure slowly reversed over my dead corpse, to make sure he finished the job. I clenched onto the handle of my coffee mug and contemplated my options. On one hand, I could shout it out with Robert on the sales floor. On the other hand, I could throw this boiling hot coffee in his face. I pondered my options and took a sip of coffee. Robert had broken eye contact and went back to reading his magazine. I looked down at the lead sheet with an utterly deflated expression on my face. I shook my head and decided to take the high road. I decided to focus on the journey, not the destination. Begrudgingly, I shook it off, shrugged my shoulders, and went back to calling. The next name on the list was a Jeff Wood. He sounded like a real winner. I took a deep breath and started dialing. Ring, ring, ring. "Hello?" "Hi, is Jeff there? Mr. Wood?" "This is him. How can I help? Wait, who is this?" "My name is Mike Allen. I'm a local insurance broker," I said with fleeting luster. "Okay, good for you. What do you want?" "Well, Jeff, you recently submitted a request for a life insurance quote. Are you still in the market for a policy?" "I was just curious. I'm not really in the market anymore." Robert looked at me and whispered, "Why not?" I shot him back a thumbs up. His message was received loud and clear. "That's interesting. If you don't mind me asking, what made you change your mind?" A loud groan came over the receiver. At least he didn't instantly hang up on me. That was a pretty good sign. After talking it over with my neighbor, he said that I should just put my money aside in my savings account instead of getting a policy. He actually made some good points. "Jeff, that's interesting. Can you tell me more?" "Well, he said that most insurance companies never pay out on term insurance policies. He said something like 95 to 97% of people outlive their term insurance policies, which to me seems like a big waste of money." Jeff had a rational, logical, and even, dare I say, compelling explanation for why he thought life insurance was a waste of money. I sat quietly for a second to mull over his proposition. Should I quit or press forward? I decided to not let it deter me and press on. The way I looked at it, I really had nothing to lose. "Jeff, can I ask you something?" "Sure thing." "Do you normally take financial advice from your neighbor? I'm just curious." I was riding a fine line between overtly offending him and questioning his motives. Well, that all depends." "On?" "It would depend on the advice." "Yeah, that makes sense. Do you mind if I ask you another question?" "Well, that all depends." "On?" "That all depends on the question you want to ask." "Fair enough." We both took a second to chuckle. We clearly had a good rapport going. You know the kind where you just instantly click with someone. That's the thing about being sarcastic. It either brings you together or separates you. Why do you want life insurance in the first place? What piqued your interest? I mean, it sounds like something clearly got your attention. Why'd you fill out the request? My wife and I are starting a family, or at least planning on it soon. We'd like to have kids. That's great. Starting a family is the fun part. You know the key to having kids? What? The more you practice, the faster it tends to happen. Yeah, the practice is the fun part of the process. I could tell that small overture was going to go a long way with Jeff. Robert went back to reading his magazine. Not so much as a peep came out of Robert. Look, that's fine. Saving money is always a great thing to do. I'm not going to say that's a bad idea or that life insurance is a better idea. I paused to see if he would immediately jump back in the conversation. So you're saying I shouldn't buy life insurance? No offense, Mike, but what kind of salesperson tries to unsell his product? Well, hold on. Let me qualify that. That depends on one thing. What's that? Let's say you go to the gym tomorrow. Do you work out? Are you a pretty active person? I probably get to the gym about 2 or 3 times a week. Let's say you and me hang up the phone right now, and you decide that it's time to hit the gym. Let's say you go to the gym and have a great workout. Let's say as you walk out of the gym, you trip over your shoelaces, and as you fall into the street, you get hit by a bus. Let me ask you something. Is your neighbor going to step up and take care of your mortgage? I didn't know a lot about selling life insurance, but I knew if I was going to ask a question like that I needed to shut up and wait for him to respond. I waited, and about 30 seconds later he said, I don't think so. No, he wouldn't. That's a good point. Is he going to pay for your funeral? No. Is he going to pay for your wife's grocery bills? No, I don't think he would. Then who will? Robert looked over and gave me a thumbs up. One minute he seemed overjoyed, and the next Robert seemed to be almost jealous. Either way, after this call, I needed to confront him about the lack of actual training going on in the trainee program. The other end of the phone was dead silent. There was an eerie comfortability in the silence. All I heard was heavy breathing and then a loud moan. I don't know. I guess my savings should cover it? Do you mind if we explore that for a second? Sure. How much do you have saved up, ballpark? In my savings, I think it's something like $25,000, and in our checking account, we float probably, around $2,000 or so. If you're saving $2,000 per month, then we should hang up the phone right now. I waited for a second to let Jeff mull that over. No, not $2,000 a month. What I meant to say was that we try to have $2,000 in our checking account, $2,000 total, for emergencies. That way we don't have to tap into our savings. Oh, well, let me ask you something then, Jeff. What do you think a life insurance policy cost? Roughly speaking, of course. I have no idea. Take a guess. Like $500 a month? For someone in your age, in your area, like $50 to $100 per month. In reality, the truth was I had no idea. I had no idea if this guy would even qualify for life insurance. I glanced over at Robert to get some kind of indication. He looked up and shook his head in disappointment. For the life of me, I had no idea why it was so hard to please this guy. $100 a month? That's all? That's less than my cable bill. Believe it or not, most people tend to think it's much more expensive than it really is. Why don't we get you a quote? I don't know about that, Mike. I pictured Jeff in my head with this beguiled, almost grimaced expression. His voice was bellowing with a childlike timidness. Come on, Jeff, what do you have to lose? How would something like that work? I'm not going to bore you too much with the details. What I would like to do is just gather some basic information. With that info, I will go out and shop the insurance market. When I find a carrier that looks like the best fit, then I can submit an application for you. How does that sound? What's the catch? Do I have to give you my credit card info? Do I have to sign anything? Absolutely not. Once we submit the application, the life insurance company will do one of two things: offer to insure you or decline to offer. You get a take it or leave it offer. Until then, and until you get an offer back, forget about it. For now, let me just gather the basic info. Okay, sure, let's do it. What do you need from me? We spoke for another 10 minutes or so. I gathered all the necessary info to get a quote going. I made sure to do a little dance in my seat. I was starting to get good at this. Great, that'll do it. I'll call you in about a week to cover the next steps in the process. How does that sound? Sure, evenings work best for me. And that was that. I was struck with a sudden sense of appreciation for this whole cold calling thing, and there was a certain level of satisfaction that came along with that appreciation. I slowly hung up the phone and looked over at Robert. This isn't so hard after all, I thought. How was that? It was great. You dared to be great. A valiant effort indeed. You're running on 110% enthusiasm and 0% brains. Kid, you still have no idea what you're talking about, though. You have one clear flaw, one clear weakness, one clear Achilles heel. Yeah? What's that, Robert? I asked as I shook my head in disbelief. What was with this guy? I mean, how much can someone put you down? I'm all for constructive criticism, but this was more like just criticism for the sake of criticism. You're a born winner, a cesspool of talent and good genetics. Your arrogance has arrogance. Yeah, no, I get that a lot. I really appreciate it. It was mind-boggling that a salesperson could be such a hater, especially considering he was my trainer. Watch the attitude, kid. My job is to tell you what to do. You need to lean into the process. Stop fighting it. You broke the golden rule of sales. Golden rule? You gave him a price. That price is about right, isn't it? Are you that dense? Being right is not the point. That's not the point at all. Okay, what is the point? How much does this guy know about insurance? Don't answer that. It's a rhetorical question, you moron. He knew nothing before speaking with you, and now only knows one thing after speaking with you. Robert shook his head and started laughing, but not in a funny way. Not in a ha-ha kind of way. It was more maniacal. All he knows now is that number you put in his head. All he knows is $100 per month. Well, What happens when you get an offer from the life insurance company after a month of work and the premium is $200 or $300 a month? How do you plan on explaining that in a way that doesn't make you look like a crook? Well, I guess No, there is no I guess. You need to do what you're told. Robert took a deep breath and collected himself. His face was becoming increasingly redder as the conversation progressed. It was becoming apparent that my self-proclaimed success was rather short-lived. Here's what just happened. You wasted the firm's time, your time, and the prospect's time. Then, guess what? He goes online and roasts this firm for misrepresentation and a bait-and-switch style tactics. Every time you open your mouth, you represent this firm. Got it? I got it. Do you? Or are you just saying that you got it? I got it. Don't give a price over the phone. Don't break the golden rule. I never considered myself to be a quitter, but this wasn't quite what I expected. To say it lightly, this might just not be for me. Honestly, at this point, I just needed a breather to clear my head. Can we take a 15-minute break? Would you mind? Robert leaned over a bit and had this strange look on his face. I imagined he had some deep-seated reservations. Sure thing. I could use another cup of coffee. Let's meet back here at your desk in 15 minutes. I slowly got up out of my chair and headed for the door. Suddenly my legs were corrupted by a wobbly, debilitating feeling shivering down to my toes. The room and my head began spiraling. All I could see was the bright red fluorescent exit sign. I made a stutter step to the door and thrust it open. Just as I opened the door, the bright white sun hit me and I shoved my forearm over my brow. At the same time, I was scrambling for my car keys in my pocket. I pulled them out of my pocket and dropped them like a buffoon right in front of my car. I squatted down, which was no easy task due to the 3-digit temperature outside. The heat barreling over me and the sweat was dripping down my arm as I grabbed the keys off the ground. I shoved them into the keyhole and opened the driver's side door. What a day this was turning out to be. I jumped in the driver's seat and hit the ignition switch. As far as I was concerned, I couldn't leave this place fast enough. I was shifting the car into reverse. I took a deep, purposeful breath. The tunnel vision began to fade away and my head began to clear. The cloudiness that was cluttering my mind slowly subsided. What was I doing? Was that all it took for me to break? Was I having a panic attack? Maybe I was just overthinking the whole situation and being a little dramatic. Either way, I needed a second to collect myself. Either way, I needed time to think. Before I knew it, 10 minutes passed me by. I was sweating profusely, so I turned up the air conditioning. I could feel my heart racing like the beat of a drum. I could feel my heart pounding through my chest. I could feel my heart thumping. I was stuck at a crossroads. Some might call it an inflection point. On the one hand, I could put this car into reverse and head on home. On the other hand, I could collect myself and go back to work. I had nothing to lose by walking away, but at the same time I had everything to lose by walking away. I tapped my fingers on my steering wheel for about 5 more minutes. I found myself with one hand on the wheel and the other fondling the tip of my car key. That was it. I made a decision. I turned off the car and slowly made my way back to the office. I haven't gone this far to only go this far. I wasn't going to give up for the sake of just giving up. I grabbed a crumpled up wad of napkins to wipe the sweat off my forehead. As I walked towards the door, just as I was about to grab the handle, it swung open towards me. Bill walked out of the building like a man on a mission. We started passing each other, me on the way in and him on the way out, presumably on his way to a client lunch or some important meeting. "I'm hearing good things about you. Keep it up, Mike." He did kind of an awkward pat on the shoulder as he walked to his car. I stood there for a second and went back to my desk. That was all the encouragement I needed to keep on trucking. I think I made the right decision. As I walked back to my desk, I noticed Robert was still absent. I sat down and took a long, deep breath. I counted slowly to 7 as I inhaled, held for a second, and counted down from 7 as I exhaled. I did this for a minute or so to get my rhythm back to normal. If calling dead people wasn't going to break me, then nothing would. I was supremely confident. Nothing was going to stop me but me. I was going to see this through until the end. These were the cards I was dealt, and I was going to play them out. Robert walked back over to my desk. That was my cue to start back up. I picked up the phone and, without provocation, just started dialing. The next name on my list read Janice Dickey. Ring, ring, ring. "This is Janice Dickey speaking." Ah, success! She picked up. Time to shine. Robert started drumming on his thighs to pass the time. "Janice, this is Mike Allen with Montrosian Insurance Partners. I'm following up on your recent request for some information about life insurance. Did I catch you at a good time?" "Yes, you did, in fact, but I'm too old to get life insurance." I was surprised by her level candor and found myself curtailing my own spontaneous laughter. At least she didn't hang up on me right away. That was a good sign as far as I was concerned. "Come on, Janice, you're never too old to get life insurance. Trust me." I looked over at Robert for an assist. How do I ask someone how old they are without actually asking them how old they are? It was quite the dilemma. "That's not what the last guy told me." "The last guy?" "Someone else called me. I think he was from your firm. He said I probably couldn't qualify based on my age, so I stopped looking." Believe it or not, even if you're over 70, generally speaking, you can still qualify for some kind of life insurance. I was met with a long pause on the other line. "At this point in my life, the time I have left is valuable to me. I don't want to lose more of it talking to salespeople. You sound nice, but I'm just not interested anymore." I blurted out the first thing that came into my head. I was barely scratching the surface of my right hemisphere. I was grasping at straws, searching the furthest abscesses of my mind for some kind of intelligent retort. I blurted out what I could. "Are you sure?" "Thank you. You sound very sweet, I'm sure. Have a nice day." "You too, Janice." Click. The line went dead. Once again, I found myself sitting in a chair holding a dead receiver next to my ear. Robert knocked on my desk with his right middle knuckle and pointed at the phone.
"Look at the bright side. She picked up the phone, right?"
"That's fair."
"It's all part of the game, Mike. It's all part of the game. Most people end up going out to lunch and never end up returning. The rejection is rough. It breaks most people. A piece of advice, don't take it personally."
I looked at Robert and said, "I appreciate the overture."
"Just make one more call and then we can wrap it up."
I didn't realize it, but it was almost 6:30 p.m. Time sure does fly when you're having fun. I'd been smiling and dialing for hours. I guess the day just passed me right on by.
"Sure thing."
One more call to end the day. That was fine by me. Fine, just fine. Maybe if I'm lucky, they won't even pick up.
Ring, ring, ring. "Hello?"
"Hello, is Craig Jones available?" I could feel that my process was slowly slipping away from me, like sand pouring through your fingertips at the beach. I chalked it up to a minor dose of battle fatigue.
"I'm Craig. How can I help?"
"Craig, my name is Mike Allen with Montrosian Insurance Partners. Is this a good time to talk?"
"No, not really. I'm just about to sit down for dinner. Why? What's up?"
"Well, what's up is, I'm following up on your recent request for life insurance. Are you still in the market for a life policy?"
"No, I'm good. I've got it through work."
Which was predictably followed by a loud click. Who said a career in life insurance couldn't be fun? Who said a career in life insurance couldn't be exciting? It's not a job, it's an adventure, right? I knew one thing. I knew that I wanted to be a millionaire, and I sure wasn't going to accomplish that goal waiting tables. I slowly put the phone down. As I began packing up for the day, Robert slid his chair in nice and close.
"Don't take it personally. It's just business. Let's call it a day."
"Sounds good to me." Robert disconnected his splitter connection from my phone and started packing up his stuff for the day.
"Look at it this way. It can't possibly get any worse. It can only get better from here."
I started cleaning up my desk space and stood up to leave. I stretched my arms out, yawned, and headed home for the evening.